Ever since Apple announced the transition to their own Apple Silicon chips, ditching Intel, they have been in a huge feud, going back and forth, jabbing at each other, with Intel actually hiring the I'm a Mac guy, and then going as far as to hire Apple's own engineer that led the transition from Intel-based Macs to Apple Silicon. So they're going at it for the last couple of years, but it looks like Apple is finally getting the leg up with some major changes to what's happening in the laptop chip world. So let's get right into it. But before I get into all of that, let me go through some of what's going on with their chips right now to give us some context for what's about to be happening. Earlier this year, Intel unveiled their Alder Lake chips for their laptops, which ended up basically outperforming Apple's best M1 Max chip in their 16-inch MacBook Pro. Now that's very impressive. However, they had to do it by using a lot of power. And in NTech's review of the M1 Max, Tom's Hardware pointed out that when they were testing the Core i9-12900HK, which is the best Alder Lake Intel chip, it consumed up to 94 watts from the wall compared to an NTech's review of the M1 Max that only consumed 39.7 watts. That's almost 2.5 more times power to just barely be faster than the M1 Max. But not only that, we actually compared this i9-12900HK chip to Apple's M1 Max. But the crazy thing is we used the 14-inch MacBook Pro, which is known to have a little bit of thermal throttling compared to the 16-inch. And guess what? In multiple tests, real-world tests, the M1 Max was actually beating out the Alder Lake in the GE76 chassis, which is a thick chassis. But the craziest thing of all was when we tested the battery life, with the M1 Max getting 20 hours of video playback compared to 4.5 on that Alder Lake laptop, or 7 hours video rendering compared to only 2.5 in our testing. And that actually matches the testing of Tom's Hardware as well, because their MacBook Pro lasted 15.5 hours compared to only 4 hours and 5 minutes in the same environment for the GE76 Raider, the same Intel laptop that we tested. But now making it worse, it looks like Intel's upcoming Raptor Lake generation of chips uses even more power than Alder Lake, for example, showing off the different sizes of the desktop chips. But of course, this power usage is also gonna translate to the laptops as well, so they're gonna use even more power than they already do. So because of that, Intel was planning to use TSMC's next-gen 3nm process node for their future Meteor Lake chips. But unfortunately, once again, it looks like Intel is postponing and delaying it again, because looking at the source, TrendForce, here's what they said. They said mass production of this product was initially planned for the second half of 2022, but was later postponed to the first half of 2023 due to product design and process verification issues. Recently, the product's mass production schedule has been postponed again to the end of 2023 for some reason, almost completely canceling 3nm production capacity originally booked in 2023, with only a marginal amount of wafer input remaining for engineering verification. So based on that, it seems like Intel's not gonna have their next Meteor Lake chips ready until 2024. But here's where things get very interesting, especially on the Apple side. TSMC came out and they commented on those rumors about Intel canceling their 3nm orders, and they said that TSMC does not comment on the business of individual customers. The company's capacity expansion product is proceeding as planned. So yes, it looks like even though Intel is delaying 3nm for their own Meteor Lake chips, TSMC is not delaying anything. They're still pushing and planning the same capacity that they were gonna make anyway for 3nm, and I know why. Way back in April, it was reported that TSMC was planning to start 3nm chip production in the second half of this year, which is 2022, but then in June, we got this monster report from Jeff Pu saying that TSMC is gonna start producing Apple's M2 Pro chip later this year, which is gonna be on TSMC 3nm. Yes, 3 nanometer, not 5 nanometer. So I made a video talking about all of that, talking about how 3 nanometer is going to be like, what kind of performance differences there should be. And then after I made that video, we got another report from Digitimes saying that the upcoming M2 Pro chip for the high-end MacBook Pro and Mac Mini will be using 3 nanometer. Yes, the same 3 nanometer that Intel was supposed to use up, but they delayed it and canceled almost all of their orders. And because of that, it started sparking some discussion about the M2 Pro and M2 Max chip offering massive performance leaps over the M2, because a lot of people were expecting the M2 Pro and Max to be based on the same 5 nanometer architecture that the M2 is based on, but I disagree. I think it's gonna be 3 nanometer, and because of that, the performance is gonna be crazy. And a big reason I believe these next M2 Pro and Max chips are gonna be based on 3 nanometer is because Apple is gonna be essentially the only major company left to take TSMC's 3 nanometer capacity because Intel canceled. So if Apple doesn't switch to 3 nanometer early next year and they wait, who is gonna take the first wave of 3 nanometer? Basically nobody, and TSMC has already confirmed that everything's going as scheduled. They're not gonna delay 3 nanometer. I think that's because the M2 Pro and Max are gonna be on 3 nanometer. Now, I did speak to Mark Gurman about the next gen 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros that we should be expecting, and according to him, those machines are gonna have the same design on the outside, so no design changes at all, which means that the changes will be coming to the inside. And in my opinion, I don't think it's enough to give us the same 5 nanometer based chips. I don't think that's gonna be a big improvement because if you didn't already know, the M2 chip uses significantly more power than the M1. In fact, in Cinebench, we saw that it uses 36% more average power to only get 13% more score, which basically shows that the M2 chip is overclocked like crazy on that 5 nanometer architecture. And if you've seen our coverage last year of the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, you'll know that the highest end M1 Max chip is too much for the 14-inch chassis. Yes, it thermal throttles and it slows down performance when you have a maxed out version. In fact, if you get the 16-inch MacBook Pro with the 24-core GPU, it's actually faster throughout multiple tests than the 32-core version in the 14-inch chassis. Yes, that's because of thermal throttling. It's not able to handle the heat. So imagine if Apple made the M2 Pro and M2 Max on 5 nanometer again, which is gonna suck up a lot of power. I don't think that's happening. I think Apple is planning to switch to 3 nanometer, and because of that, I think Intel is in trouble because Intel keeps delaying Meteor Lake, and I think it's gonna take Meteor Lake to finally compete with Apple Silicon because Raptor Lake is gonna consume power like crazy. They're not gonna have that 3 nanometer GPU tile, so I feel like Intel is gonna be struggling until Meteor Lake comes out, and I don't think that's happening until 2024. So I think these next MacBook Pros that we're gonna get are gonna be insane. They're gonna be amazing. The performance is gonna be crazy, and they're not gonna heat up as much as they did before, especially as much as if Apple stuck to 5 nanometers. So if you disagree with me, let me know down in the comment section below. But if you agree, click that circle above to subscribe for more videos like this one and check out one of those two right there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.